the impetus to do this? This is not part of a national law of any sort. Why did Nasdaq decide to take this big step?
So Nasdaq's been focused on diversity for a while now. We've signed up for various frameworks like the Parity Pledge, the 30% Coalition, more recently the Board Challenge. And so it's something we've been looking at as a while. As a national stock exchange, one of the key areas we have to focus on is the corporate governance standards for our companies. It wasn't so long ago, back in 2003, when we said we want to see the majority of directors be independent. At the time, that was kind of controversial. Now it's accepted as a norm. And so we felt like this is the right time now to put forward this new disclosure framework where all of our Nasdaq listed companies will have a consistent way to communicate their board composition, as well as their board diversity philosophy for all their stakeholders, including investors.
Now, there will be a public comment period. What kind of pushback are you expecting, and have you got so far from companies themselves who might say, look, this is a pipeline problem. We're trying, but it's really hard?
We did a lot of research on this issue before we put forward our proposed rule. We also spoke to dozens of organizations such as the ACLU, NAACP. So we feel really positive about the way we structured this rule filing. And we think that it's going to be a really nice way to be a first step in this journey to bring more diversity into the boardroom. We also announced today a partnership with Equilar, which has the largest database of diverse director candidates for our listed companies that don't currently meet the standard, so that they can join us on the journey to have a more diverse board.
Now, the way that the rule is written, Nasdaq has given companies an out. They can simply give some reasons why they don't have or meet these requirements and then move forward. Goldman Sachs, on the other hand, drew a firmer line. Do you think you might actually make this an official requirement? And what would be the impetus to do that?
Well, I think the one thing that everybody we spoke to about this agreed on was there's a lack of disclosure. And that's really the first step in addressing the issue, is making sure there's a consistent disclosure framework. A number of states have enacted legislation to require certain numbers of either female or diverse directors, but there hasn't been a consistent national framework. And so that's really one of the things that this rule proposal highlights, is it allows investors and all of company stakeholders the ability to see what companies have in terms of their current level of diversity and what their goals are for the future. So we think by taking the first step as creating a disclosure standard, along with a comply or explain framework, that's going to give companies the ability to articulate their position on this issue.
So then if this is a first step, do you see Nasdaq taking more steps?
Well, I think we've been on a journey for a long time in terms of what is the right structure for corporate governance for all of our listed companies. It's something we're always looking at. One of the big trends in the capital markets these days is the whole topic of ESG-focused funds and investments. And so investors now are looking for much broader disclosure from companies rather than just the financials. They want to understand how they're addressing things like the environment, society, as well as their governance standards. So I think this is really part of a broader trend of investors looking for more and broader disclosures from companies.
Now, I got to ask you about this Salesforce Slack deal. Obviously, you know, Slack is a listing that you fought hard for as the head of West Coast listings. What's your take on the deal and your views on software consolidation in general?
Well, if you look at what has happened this year due to the pandemic, there's been this huge work from home trade that's been on. If you look at the Nasdaq 100, we're actually up 40% this year versus 4% for the Dow Jones Industrial Average. Now, part of that's starting to reverse with the announcements of some positive results from vaccines from some Nasdaq listed companies. But overall, you can see that companies that are leading digital transformation and that are innovative in their sectors are the ones that investors are really rewarding. And now we're starting to see the next phase of that growth in terms of acquisitions of some of the high flyers.
When you talk to startups, how do you convince them that going public is the right way to go in this environment versus an acquisition?
Well, it's obviously something that every company has to decide for themselves. And so it used to be that there was a dual track where companies would look at IPO versus M&A. Now we're seeing the triple track with the emergence of SPACs. We've had over $50 billion raised on Nasdaq this year for special purpose acquisition companies looking to merge with private companies to bring them to the public markets. So there's now more ways than ever for private companies to access the public markets and the liquidity and the ability to raise capital that it presents.
Nasdaq will also be the home for Airbnb when it gets to the public markets later this month, potentially just a week from now. What are you expecting as we end the year in what seems to be a lot of pent-up demand for IPOs in this environment?
We have an incredible lineup of IPOs coming this December between Airbnb, Wish, Affirm, just to name a few. And I can tell you, we are already actively discussing with a number of companies that are targeting some pretty big IPOs in Q1 and Q2 next year. So we don't see any signs of this slowing down.
The long-term stock exchange, is that competition? There are reports and speculation that Airbnb could do an additional listing on another exchange that also claims to care about sustainability and long-term growth.
I think we're very aligned. We also have a very strong focus on long-term value creation. I think that's one of the reasons that we moved forward on this whole initiative around boardroom diversity. So I think any innovations in the capital markets that drives a longer-term mindset is a good thing.